are listening to Fragments of History, a podcast series that looks at different events and people in the life of St Josemaria and the history of Opus Dei. St Josemaria was a man with many good friends. He always valued friendship as one of the great treasures of life, and he left this message as a legacy to the faithful of the work. Pablo Pérez, professor of contemporary history at the University of Navarra, spoke of St Josemaria's lasting and deep friendship with Francisco Moreno and Enrique Giménez Arnau, two friends he met in his youth in Zaragoza. This is an English adaptation of that account.
In the history of Opus Dei, the role played by its founder is very special. Today, I would like to refer to an aspect of Josemaria Escriva's personality and life that has left a strong mark on the history of Opus Dei. I will first recount two incidents of his friendships, and then we will dwell a little on the legacy he passed on to people about how to live friendship. The first friendship I would like to mention is Josemaria's friendship with a classmate from the seminary in Zaragoza. St Josemaria's parents lived with his sister Carmen and his younger brother Santiago in Logroño, when in 1920 he moved to the seminary in Zaragoza, and there, between 1920 and 1923, he lived with a man by the name of Francisco Moreno, who was one of the closest friends at the seminary in Zaragoza. So close that Francisco would take him to his village, a village in Teruel, to spend the holidays, and sometimes Josemaria would take him to spend some time with his parents in Logroño. It was with Francisco that St Josemaria shared his concern about the situation of his father, a man who had owned a small business in Barbastro, who had been ruined and was now old, tired, and forced to work as a clerk in a fabric shop. Francisco remembers how he comforted Josemaria when he was worried about his father. He also remembers how his family became so fond of Josemaria that he was practically another son. In short, it was a close friendship, which Francisco Moreno wrote extensively about when he heard of Josemaria Escriva's death. What he wrote is included in Ramon Jarando's book, The Seminary Years of Josemaria Escriva in Zaragoza, 1920 to 1925, a very interesting book for getting to know the personality of the young Josemaria Escriva, but is yet to be translated into English. While Francisco was ordained a priest in 1923, he returned to Zaragoza to live in the seminary of San Carlos, which was in the same building as the seminary of San Francisco de Paula, and there he kept in touch with Josemaria. He was studying canon law as well as exercising his priestly ministry when a crisis arose in 1924, and Francisco decided to leave the priesthood. This caused Josemaria Escriva great chagrin and a great concern to get his friend to return, to reconsider what he was doing, and to rediscover his vocation. In fact, he left for Barcelona immediately after finishing that course. We have the testimony of a telegram from Josemaria Escriva's father, who asks him when he is going to return from Barcelona. He went to see him there. This man had already looked for another job and was far from his initial intention of living as a priest. This quest for Francisco's recovery continued for a long time, at the same time as Josemaria was going through very difficult times. To remind us a little of the environment in which he moved, that same year, November 24, his father died, and those Dickensian scenes of 1924 took place. First on the 27th of November, when Josemaria returned to Logroño, and before the body of his father, his brother Santiago Escriva de Balaguer remembered him clearly as he was 6 years old at the time. He recalled that his brother said solemnly before his father's remains, "I will never abandon you. I will never leave you alone," referring to his mother and his siblings. That Christmas was very sad because their father was absent, because they had no financial means to celebrate. His brother Santiago also remembers how the most special thing they could do was that Carmen bought some marzipan, and it turned out that it was bad, and they couldn't eat or drink anything, not even a sad treat. or joyful treat in this case, to celebrate the important feast of Christmas. Whenever I recall these scenes, I think of a Dickensian atmosphere with all its sadness and gloom surrounding it. And I am greatly surprised by its contrast with the joy with which Josemaria Escriva lived all that time. Besides the difficulty of losing his friend or the loss of his friend's vocation, Josemaria also faced a series of contradictions in the seminary because there were some people who suspected that Josemaria would end up following the same path as Francisco, because at the end of the day, by going to study law, Francisco was somehow preparing a way out of the priesthood, something which made Josemaria suffer a lot. In the end, that friendship was not lost, but it continued. Josemaria kept trying to keep in touch with his friend as much as possible, trying to bring him back. They did not see each other often, but Francisco remembers how, after the war ended, Josemaria immediately got in touch with him as soon as he knew where he was, spoke to him, told him about Opus Dei, explained what he was doing, and insisted once again that he should get back on his feet. He never listened to him. In fact, he ended up obtaining laicization in the 1960s, 40 years after that first crisis. But he always remembers that Josemaria was the friend who went to see him, who loved him dearly, and who always told him the truth that he should change. It is very moving to read this man's testimony about their youthful friendship and how their lives were intertwined. Well, a second case of friendship, also from the Zaragoza years, this time with a fellow student at the faculty, Enrique Giménez Arnau, which was to have a certain significance in an episode that I have studied in some detail, namely the ethics classes for journalists given by Josemaria Escriva in 1941. In the 1925-26 academic year, Giménez Arnau was a law student in his first year. Josemaria Escriva had been just ordained. He had been ordained in the year 25 and had begun a degree in civil law. And he says that among the students, the only thing that distinguished Josemaria from the students was his cassock. But he was just one of their classmates. He describes that he chatted with us in the cloisters of the faculty. He took part in our student concerns, in our fears and the antics of the exams. Giménez Arnau was then 17, 6 years younger than Josemaria. And there was another element that differentiated them but which ended up strengthening the bonds of friendship between them. Enrique knew little Latin and needed it to pass his examination in canon law. Josemaria offered to give him private lessons, and from there the young priest's friendship with the Giménez Arnau family was born. Josemaria was not at all well off, as we have just recalled, but very markedly refused to charge Enrique, who belonged to a well-to-do family, for his lessons. This is another symptom of that friendship, lived intensely, generously from the heart, always going beyond whenever he could to help his friends in their particular situations. The war separated them, as did Josemaria's move to Madrid after the war. And they didn't meet until during the war, in Burgos in 1938, when they met in a street. There was a great surprise when they met, and Josemaria invited him to assist him at a mass he was going to celebrate in a convent. And there they had breakfast together. Giménez Arnau recalls, with one of those delicacies that the nuns prepare in convents, some kind of pasta or something like that. And he remembers perfectly how Josemaria encouraged him to eat, even though it was a Friday in Lent that day, pointing out to him that the mortification was not exactly in the quantity, but in something more profound. And bringing that memory to mind, Giménez Arnau writes, "An air of joyful sanctity transcended in Josemaria. The strong friendship with him ended up leading to his asking him to baptize his first son later on, to his inviting him to be a teacher in those courses for the training of journalists in 1941, and in a friendship that lasted all his life without Josemaria Escriva ever speaking to Giménez Arnau about Opus Dei because he understood that it was not his path. It is another example of how he loved his friends who were different from him in age, different in other aspects of their opinions, of all kinds, political or professional, but who had a very important place in his heart. This way of understanding the relationship with others, the way of seeing how a friendship can be formed, how human relationships should be, is something that Josemaria Escriva instilled in the people of Opus Dei from the very beginning. There's a very amusing testimony, or at least I find it so, because surprisingly it is written by a very prominent man in ornithology in Spain, José Antonio Valverde, one of the founders of the Spanish Ornithological Society, who died in 2003, and who wrote a book in several volumes entitled Memoirs of a Heterodox Biologist. And in that book you can read the following. Ángel Jolín was one of the many people who in times of trouble gave me friendship and courage. This is a footnote of mine. Ángel Jolín was one of the first faithful of Opus Dei in Valladolid. I return to Valverde's phrase. He was a hemophiliac, and as a doctor he fearlessly saw an end already near, because every joint hemorrhage was followed by a reduction in his already diminished movements. When I met him, he used walking sticks and could bend his elbows very little. He had a house in Laguna de Duero, very close to the now dried-up pond where we used to go bird-watching on the short walks we could do, propped up by our walking sticks. He also often invited me to a residence where there was a small library that housed a treasure, the book Mammals of the Iberian Peninsula by Ángel Cabrera. It was a flat where university students and graduates met to study and pray in silence. A strange but friendly atmosphere. One could not praise a tie or a lighter without being offered them on the spot, with hardly any possibility of cordial rejection. A group of them, excellent rowers, used to go up the Pisuerga River many kilometers upstream, on day trips combining sport, swimming, hunting, and ornithological observations. I knew quite a few of them before, and they were, without exception, excellent people. That's it for Valverde's quote, which has always amused me, but it is very striking how these first members of Opus Dei in Valladolid in particular have this spirit of close friendship with the people they live with, of generosity in their relationships with others. In a way, as the current prelate of Opus Dei says in a pastoral letter he wrote last year, St Josemaria had found in the Gospel stories that friendship was a form of apostolate, and so it has incarnated in Opus Dei, and so it will be passed on.